Hola. So we'll continue this afternoon in shamatha and now really go to the subtlest and, in fact, according to the Buddha, the most profound of all of the shamatha methods that he taught. And this is shamatha without a sign. And we'll be following a sequence of practices taught by Padmasambhava. But if you know where to look, and you have to look hard, in the Pali Canon you'll find that the Buddha did teach it. It's called Vijnana Kasina. It's among 10 kasinas, or emblems, that one focuses on, and thereby develops shamatha, develops jhana, achieves the jhanas. And it is simply awareness of awareness. It is consciousness of being conscious. And I've looked, and I've just hardly found any commentary or literature at all. Just the sutta, the Kasina Sutta, and it's the 10th kasina. It's earth, water, fire, air, white, red, blue, yellow, space, and consciousness, those 10. But the Buddha said among the 40 topics that he explained for achieving shamatha, this is the most profound, and seems to me it certainly is. And when Padmasambhava teaches a whole array of methods, starting from the coarsest, looking at a stone, a stick, or a flower, just looking at it and trying to stay focused, the subtlest one that he teaches is this one that we'll be going through in a few sessions. But to relate this to sleeping, dreaming, and dying, and if I ever use these notes again, it'll be sleeping, dreaming, dying, and living, because that's rather important too. That the practice we've been doing of settling the mind in its natural state can be one in which you really are taking an interest in and focusing on the events of the mind. And for most of our sessions we were doing that. And we see the analogy given by Dujam Lingpa, a cowherd looking at, really watching his cows or his sheep and cows out on an open plain, which means there is a referent to what you're looking at. It's the sheep and the cows. And so you're looking at, there's the vector, the space of the mind, and whatever comes up in it. And so that's shamatha with a sign. I think I will not read it. It's quite clear in the notes. There's quite a wonderful passage from the great Gelugpa master, Penshen Rosan Chukyi Gyaltsen, tutor of the 5th Dalai Lama. And he gives the analogy, I'm just drawing from his passage there, gives the analogy of observing a raven in flight. The very short story of that, Indian navigators going out to sea, bringing the ravens with them in a cage. They get out to sea where they're running out of supplies, need to find their nearest land, toss the raven up, the raven goes up, and if the raven sees land, heads off towards the land, the navigator follows the raven to the nearest land. But if the raven can't find any land, the raven goes up and up and up, and then comes back down and alights back on the ship. And so Penshen Rinpoche, and this is an old Mahamudra analogy, gives this as an analogy of you being the navigator, sitting quietly in stillness and observing thoughts come up. And if you're very relaxed, they may go on for some time, roving around, and you just watch them, and then sooner or later they will just dissolve back into the space of the mind, like the raven alighting back on the ship. So if you're watching thoughts like the navigator watches the raven, the cowherder watching his herd, then that's shamatha with a sign. And if you recall those 4 mindfulnesses, when you come to the culmination of that, or the penultimate type of mindfulness, all the ravens, all the cows have simply disappeared into the space of the mind, and you have that brief transition of just gazing into the empty vacuity of the substrate. Now that method is really a perfect preliminary or preparation for a couple of things. One is lucid dreaming. So you're observing the mind, seeing mental events as mental events rather than getting caught up, carried away by them, and mistaking them for what they are not. And so that's exactly what lucid dreaming is. So that practice is really an outstanding practice that you could practice many hours during the daytime, and each of those sessions will prepare you for being able to recognize dreams as dreams and not mistaking them for what they are not. So there's a parallel. There's another parallel which I mentioned last night, I'm pretty sure, And that is, again, to answer the question, over the last 1,200 years, what is the primary reason Tibetan yogis practice dream yoga? And it's not to have fun or emanation or in all the cool things within a lucid dream, as interesting and valuable as that can be, but rather it's primarily to prepare them for the bardo, which is very, very dreamlike, extremely dreamlike. In various ways, here's one of them. And that in a dream, I think we all know probably, there can be these abrupt discontinuities in the dream. And we may, if we're very non-lucid, just take them right in stride. So you could be dreaming that you're walking around the town of Lampeter in your dream, you're just walking around in this non-lucid dream, and then you turn a corner in downtown London, right? And you just don't give it a thought. Yeah, it was a big corner, but you don't even explain it. You say, oh, yeah. We take so many things in stride when we're not lucid. And so, in a very similar way, in the bardo, it has a whole sequence of events, and in fact, the Buddha described this himself. Very little advertised. It doesn't get much press at all. But in the Pali Canon, the Buddha does speak of the antarabhava, which is bardo, exactly. The antarabhava. I cite this in my book, Mind in the Balance. And it's Peter Harvey. Peter Harvey, he's still alive, very good English scholar of Buddhism, especially Theravada. But he wrote an introduction to Buddhism that was very fair, very good for Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Outstanding scholar. And he wrote a book called Selfless Mind. And he really covers this. And very, very interesting. In any case, the Buddha himself traced the phases of moving through the antarabhava before you head into another incarnation. Very similar, we find in the Tibetan tradition, very similar in the research done at the University of Virginia of these children who have past life recall. In many cases, documented in a book where reincarnation and biology intersect by Ian Stevenson, to the surprise of the researchers. They didn't see this coming, they don't read Buddhism. They found that in a number of cases, children who had veridical past life recall, and it really was past life, there's no other way they could have had the information, that they also recalled what happened after they died and before they took this embodiment. And they interviewed a lot of these children independently and found they gave very similar narratives of what do you do? What's it like being in that interval after one death and prior to the next conception? And that comes out to be very similar to what the Buddha said, and that comes out to be what's very similar to what's said in the Bardo literature in Tibetan Buddhism. So when you have three different sources, quite independent, and giving a similar narrative, and multiple children independently giving a similar narrative, it does kind of catch the attention. But the point being that when you're in the bardo, you will, especially during the earlier part, you'll be a ghost, and you will be able to see what's going on in our human intersubjective world, but also as a ghost, you're incorporeal, you have a mind-made body, you have a sense of being embodied, but it's the same degree of substantiality as your body in a dream. I mean, exactly. That in the bardo, you can be hovering around Lampeter. Maybe you died in Lampeter and you're watching your funeral, and then if you just get bored, at the speed of thought, you can be elsewhere. The speed of thought, you can think, but what about my wife up in Edinburgh? You know, you're dead and your former wife. And speed of thought, you're there. You're in a mental space, but you can actually be then viewing Edinburgh. And so there can be very, very rapid discontinuity. So there are a number of parallels there. So now we have a triad. Develop this skill. It's extremely useful in this lifetime, let alone any talk about reincarnation, bardo, and so forth. Extremely useful. I could go on and on, but I won't. But there's one, observe the mind in this lifetime, learn how to observe the mind and come out with the benefits that Lerab Lingpa said, and I just read them this morning. There's one. And then secondly, dreaming is going to this practice will prepare you for dreaming perfectly, because you're looking at the same cinema and cultivating the same quality of awareness, recognizing mental events as mental events, not mistaking them for what they are not. And then thirdly, it prepares you for the bardo, and in the bardo it will be to your tremendous advantage to be able to recognize the bardo as the bardo. Because many, many people do not. Just like when they're dreaming, they don't know they're dreaming. When they're thinking, they don't know they're thinking. It's called rumination. They're lost in thought. So making a habit of being lost in thought prepares you for being lost in the dream, prepares you for being lost in the bardo. And in any of those three cases, if you had a meter, how much free will there is, 0. When you're just lost in a thought, you don't even know you're thinking, where's the free will? You're not making any decisions. And if you're just lost in a dream and it's non-lucid, you may have the feeling you are, but it's all sheer driven by habit. And if you're in the bardo and you don't even know you're in the bardo, it doesn't mean it's catastrophic. You're going to go to some bad realm just because you're not lucid. But you'll just be driven completely by past habits. But you don't even know what's going on, so you're not going to make any real decisions. Whereas just exactly as in a lucid dream, and insofar as you're lucid, so in the same way, in the bardo, to the extent that you're lucid, well, you're riding the horse of your prana through the bardo, and if you're lucid, you have the reins. You have the reins, and you direct it where you will. And you're really in a position to make a wise choice. Why not? So there's that parallel. So now I'm living up to the advertisement, you say, for this retreat. And then the one we're going into now, we'll spend a few sessions just cutting it back to utterly sleek, unadorned, just awareness of awareness. This means that, of course, thoughts are not going to simply stop because you're not interested in them. They'll keep on coming up. And Young Rinpoche said what to do with them, note them just enough that you don't follow them, but that's all. The analogy I gave just recently in Moscow is if you're inside your house with doors and windows like that, and there's an extremely timid sneak thief, but timid, who wants to come in and take your stuff, and he comes to the window, and you just notice him, then the thief, just goes away, because he doesn't want to confront you. He just wants to get you when nobody's home or when you don't notice. It's just like that. So all you have to do is notice the thief, eye to eye, and then he just walks right on by. Whereas if you don't have the eye to eye, he sneaks in the back door and takes all your stuff. And when thoughts arise and you don't even know they came up, they sneak in through the back door and they kidnap you. Quite nasty. And so this practice here, we're going to make it even sleeker. And that is, as we're following Padmasambhava, he doesn't even mention thoughts. He just says, attention, just awareness. Boom, go right in. And you'll see the variations. It's quite elegant, really very elegant. And being past practice now for 700 years, it's old medicine. So this practice here, just simple awareness of awareness, and being lucid, recognizing awareness as awareness, knowing consciousness, mystery solved. This very sleek, unadorned practice then is a perfect preparation, just perfect, for entering into deep dreamless sleep and being lucid. And that can be very powerful, really powerful. Deep dreamless sleep, so you have kind of a natural samadhi, you're not being distracted, you're deep asleep. But if you can go there and then it's a gradient, but be very lucid, clearly recognizing what you're experiencing in deep dreamless sleep, so you're wide awake while in deep dreamless sleep, then it's really, as in the conversation with Filippo last night, your mind is now very powerful. You remember coarse mind, not that powerful. Dreaming mind, more powerful, more subtle. Deep dreaming mind, more powerful, more subtle. You're resting in the deepest domain. The deepest domain, not useful if you're not lucid, but if you're lucid, this is a powerful mind. It's very focused. And if you're lucid, then you're seeing the substrate, you're experiencing the substrate consciousness. And then you can, if you wish, because you're not a zombie, you're not in a trance, you can then invert that awareness right in upon itself, and you can start practicing vipassana or even tekchu. And it's not that difficult to cut through the substrate consciousness when you're right there and nothing else is going on. And if you cut through the substrate consciousness, what's on the other side of the door? Pristine awareness. So that can be very, very powerful and extremely simple. cut through to pristine awareness, Paul. You've made it to the ultimate ground. So this simple practice here, perfect preparation for lucid, deep, dreamless sleep. And that has to be a triad. So what's the third element of the triad? And that is in the dying process. Again, during the course of the dying process, when your senses are imploding and thoughts are calming down and so forth, for that, shamatha focus on the mind is just perfect fit. But when you come to the conclusion of it, of the dying process, senses have imploded, thoughts have died down, white appearance, red appearance, and then lights out, dark near attainment. Brain is flatlined. At that point, again, almost everybody just becomes unconscious. But if you've been able to maintain lucidity all the way up to that point, and then there's nothing left except this vacuity of the substrate and your awareness, which is the substrate consciousness. That's all that's left. And you'll never get that mind back again. You'll remember it, but you will never get it back again. You'll remember it for the first week or two of the bardo, and then that memory will fade, and on you go into the future. But if you can maintain lucidity up to that point, then when lights out, it will be just like lucid, dreamless sleep. And if you can be lucid there while everybody else passes out, then you're lucid right up to the door opening when the clear light of death dawns. I mean, it's going to come very shortly. Maximum 3 days could be, as I said, time to drink a cup of tea. But not long. And so if you're lucid right there and you're maintaining your lucidity, where everybody thinks you're dead, oh, and they're going, oh, he's dead. Not so fast there. You can't talk to them. I'm busy. You're there, you're dead and knowing it. I mean, you are dead. Because you never get that mind back, it's gone, and you never get the body back, so that's pretty much dead, isn't it? But you're lucid. If you can stay lucid there, if you can stay lucid and not just pass out, then when that clear light of death dawns, when the mother clear light manifests as a gift, you're not earning it, it just manifests naturally, you're right there. And if you've had any taste at all of pristine awareness before that event, you have a very good chance of recognizing it. And this is not rare at all. At least once a year or so, we hear of one more, usually one more Tibetan. I've heard just recently of one Westerner apparently manifested it. But if you can recognize that clear light of death, then you can remain there, and then you've just gone from a conditioned mind to unconditioned, because the clear light of death is unconditioned, unborn, unceasing, timeless, non-local. It's pristine awareness. And then you can rest in that. And that can go on for days or even weeks. And that is powerful. Simply resting in the substrate consciousness, if you simply rest in the substrate consciousness, are you evolving? Is there purification? No. Just like achieving shamatha and just hanging out. Well, it's very nice, but now you're not going anywhere. You were going somewhere to get there. Once you're there, if you just tread water, you're not going anywhere. Simply resting in the substrate at the culmination of the dying process, just resting there, no progress, nothing happening, but better than passing out. Where as soon as you recognize the clear light of death, the mother clear light, then resting there for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that's tremendously valuable. You're not just treading water. And in the Dujum Lingpa, and I think it was Vajra Essence, he tells you, if you can, I can't remember now the details, but he says, while you're still alive and well, if you can maintain your samadhi this long, just like mindfulness breathing or whatever, if you can maintain your samadhi this long while you're alive and well, and you've identified Rikpa, then when the clear light of death manifests, then you'll be able to remain this long. Quite interesting. I don't remember the details. So that's the value then of this shamatha without a sign. That it prepares you for deep dreamless sleep, and it also prepares you for the dead zone, which is right next to identifying Rikpa, so it's extremely useful. And then the meditation itself, those three. Final point before we move on, and that is we'll be making the segue now, we'll be crossing the bridge from Chittamatra to Madhyamaka. And in really all schools of Tibetan Buddhism, every single one, they all see a sequence here of going from coarse to subtle. the Galupas, Gaigupas, they debate on many points. It's fine. Quantum physicists debate on a whole bunch of points. There's a lot of consensual knowledge, but when it gets out to what does it mean, they debate a lot as well. So Gelug, Gaigut, Sakya, Nyingma, they debate on various points, but on this point, they really are in complete consensus. And I had that point. I dithered so much, I lost my point. What was it? What was it? I'll get it back later. It's rather important, though. Okay, I'll get it. Sometimes I just get lost in thought. I'll get it later.
Tibetan schools are in
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, they're all agreement that, and they all scholars in all four of them, they study these various philosophical schools. They all recognize Vaibhashika, really cool, incredibly foundational, relatively primitive. Sautrantika, more sophisticated, more questions, uncritical assumptions, or how to say, just assumptions are questioned as you go from Vaibhashika to Sautrantika. But they're still unquestioned assumptions. And Chittamatra comes in there, and then that's deeper. Chittamatra is deeper than Sautrantika. It kind of really is, obviously it is. And then from Chittamatra to Madhyamaka, they all agree this is the deepest yet. And within philosophical systems in the Buddhist tradition, it doesn't get deeper than this, Madhyamaka. This is Nagarjuna, Chantakirti, and so on. So, now a fundamental premise is very important, that as we're venturing into Madhyamaka, which is where we're going this afternoon, maybe a little bit left over for tomorrow morning, we're looking now not at how things appear, which can be enormously useful, but there's the way things appear, it's called nangluk, the way things appear and the way things exist, neluk. And this has come up throughout this entire retreat. The way things exist and the way things appear are often very much at variance with each other, right? So I don't need to elaborate on that. So when it comes to really examining with vipassana, by means of inquiry, probing, investigation, when we get to the point of wanting to know how does it actually exist, that's me, for example. I do exist. People exist. That's never questioned in Buddhism. But the question is, how do I exist? I know how I appear. If we look closely, how do you appear? Yeah, you can see that. It's not too hard. But how do I exist? I'm not my body, not my mind. I don't exist separately. Does this mean I don't exist at all? That's ridiculous. No, it's not that I don't exist at all. Then how do I exist? And so whether it's I, whether it's a cup, whether it's an electron, space, time, matter, mind, whenever you want to engage in this ontological analysis, which means how does it exist? Then if you want, and this is how does it really exist? How did it actually exist? What is its ultimate mode of existence? Those are all synonymous. When you want to go to that depth, and this is very deep vipassana, before, let's say a glass of water. What's the glass of water? How it appears? All clear. How does it exist? Well, if you want to do an ontological probe into how a glass of water exists, first of all, you have to have a clear bead on glass of water. You need to see how it exists relatively. And we got it. It's really not difficult. So now we're ready to go. All I have to do is show glass of water. You got it? Okay, how does it exist? You're ready to go. But if you've never seen a glass of water before, or you're really fuzzy, I don't really know what glass of water looked like. I've never seen glass, and we never had water, we only had milk. Then you're really not in a position to do an ontological probe on a glass of water, because you don't know what to look at, right? And so, that's trivial. What's not trivial is the mind. What's not trivial is consciousness. And what's pretty clear here, and I think if we really dwell on it deeply, it becomes clearer and clearer, that if we're looking into the nature of existence, how do things exist objectively, like chariots, be a good example, chariots, etc., all the stuff out there. If we're seeking, on the one hand, to understand how do they exist, and Madhyamaka will say they are empty of inherent nature, but they do exist as dependently related events, that's the answer, then between that, knowing how objective things exist, chariots, etc., And that includes the appearances to the mind. They're objective too. We look at them. Objects of the mind, I have an image of a peach, there's an emotion, and so forth, these objects of the mind. Between the two, understanding how objective phenomena exist and how does the mind exist. The mind is that which apprehends, that which sees all appearances, apprehends all objects. The appearance of Nicola's shirt, I see, identify it as a shirt with qualities, then that's an object. So the mind that sees, the mind that apprehends, that is it inherently existent. Between the two, objects and the mind that apprehends objects, that perceives appearances, you might ponder for just a few seconds. Between those two, appearances out there, objects out there, electrons, chariots, etc., and the mind that knows, the mind that perceives objects and appearances, between those two, what would you imagine is more difficult to fathom in terms of how it actually exists? Any guesses? What do you think would be, one is more difficult than the other. What do you think, which one do you think would be? Okay. Mind is more difficult. Mind is more difficult. The Chittamatrans, like the Bhikkhuni Vajira, she sees right through the chariot. It's not really there. It's just a nominal designation imputed upon things that are not a chariot. Whereas suffering, she said, this is real. It really comes from someplace. It really arises. It really ceases. She's not talking about suffering being nominal. She's talking about a chariot being nominal. She's talking about objects out there being nominal. She's not talking about the mind being nominal. And so between the two, Chittamatrans have seen through the veil of thinking there are real objects out there, independent of mind. And so they blow those away. But then they put all their investment, all the ontological burden on that which is apprehending, the mind, and the appearances to the mind that are illuminated by the mind. I should speak in a deeper voice now. Mind. Because it's heavy. It's carrying the whole burden of reality, and minds in interrelationship with each other, with their karmic imprints and so forth, out of our individual and collective minds emerges the environments that we experience individually and collectively. But apart from the appearances manifesting from the mind, there's nothing out there. So if you really investigated this and you came to the conclusion they've made a really good case, they really have made a powerful case. Bishop Berkeley in the Christian context came to the same conclusion. There's nothing but mind. There's no external physical universe. He made a strong case, but it was so against the grain of where Europe was going that they said strong case and then ignored him. Carried right on with become more and more materialistic. So enough of that. But the Chittamatra, they get that far. But then mind, their insistence here really makes sense. We've seen that out there, number one, you never see anything outside of appearances. You're imagining them, but you're actually not, by way of appearances, seeing anything. You're seeing appearances, but never seeing something else beyond appearances by way of appearances. It's all appearances. And so therefore, why don't you just give it a rest? All that we know that exists is the mind that experiences appearances and objects and the appearances to the mind, and that's it. So now if you really immersed yourself in that view, that this right now, this is really like a dream. Because you remember what Stephen LeBert said, as a good 20th century scientist, quite open-minded, he wasn't a hardball materialist, but he did say, as many of his peers would say, maybe all of them, the difference between dreaming and perception is dreaming has no external sensory constraints, whereas the waking experience does. And where are those external sensory constraints coming from? Atoms, molecules, fields, particles, waves, energy, the physical universe. That's what's constraining. And that's the big difference between dreams and waking perception. All the appearances are taking place in the same appearances. No more substantial, not one or the other. But one is constrained by what's really out there. Almost all scientists believe that. But then, as we find the physicists say, oh, by the way, We don't know what's out there. And oh, by the way, there's no space and time to hold it. So now, what's the difference? If there are actually, in fact, no external sensory constraints on a waking experience, then how is this actually different from a dream? Because that was the big one, right? And if that's blown away for lack of evidence, nobody ever sees this external physical world, then what's the difference? And it's still not the same, but the difference is much more slender. I can tell you one difference, and that is here, there's something like 160 perspectives. 160 perspectives on this room and everything going on. Each one of us is the dreamer of this individual and collective dream. But there are a whole bunch of dreamers here, right? And if I should die right now, or any of us, the rest of you will keep on dreaming and do something with this body. But you will obviously not vanish. Whereas if I'm dreaming of 160 people in the room, and then I wake up, those people aren't waiting for me for the next dream. Because they're not there, they're not people. They're not people. They look like people. They're simply mental events, and they're my mental events. So when I wake up, they don't go anywhere. The appearances just dissolve back into the substrate. So final point before we go in, and we'll be now fishing in deep waters. And that is, if you want to really know the nature of existence, how does a cup of water exist? See it, we're ready to go. But if you'd like to really do now this very deep probe, that even the Chittamatrans didn't do, and it took Nagarjuna and others of his like to show them there's still one unquestioned assumption here. You have such insight to see there's no external world out there existing in and of itself, good. But when was the last time you checked to see whether the mind exists in and of itself? That there's an absolute subject and only empty appearances. That the mind really bears the ontological burden of being inherently existent. Have you ever seen that mind, by the way? You just pointed out that nobody ever sees beyond the veil of appearances, atom, particles, fields, waves, and so forth. All you see are appearances, no matter what technology you use. It's all appearances, all the way up and all the way down. So you've seen that. But when you observe your mind, when you direct your mind awareness inwards upon the mind, do you see anything other than appearances? Do you actually bump into an inherently existent mind? Well, if you want to do that ontological probe, just like the glass of water, then before you're questioning how does the mind exist, you want to have a very clear perception. What are you talking about? Anybody can say mind or chitta, that's easy. A parrot can say mind. But what's the referent of the term? If I say, what's the referent of the term glass of water? Got it. We're ready to go. If I say, what's the referent of the term the mind, as in the mind that perceives, the mind that knows, what's the referent? You know what to look at. If you don't, then you're not in a position to ask, how does the mind exist? For the same reason like you haven't never seen a glass of water. But let's go even a little bit deeper. Something that just kind of like boggles the mind a bit, at least boggles my mind. So the mind that observes, okay, but how about consciousness? Not the mind that is aware, the mind that is conscious, but just consciousness, the stream that we've all experienced. That's not hard. The consciousness that is a stream, that we can dwell in the ongoing flow of consciousness of being conscious of being conscious, awareness of awareness of awareness. How can that not be real? How can that not be existing by its own inherent nature? How could that possibly be something that exists independent upon conceptual designation? When you can perceive it non-conceptually. If you can be dwelling in an ongoing flow of non-conceptual awareness, knowing non-conceptual awareness, how can that possibly be something that exists only independent upon conceptual designation, which is exactly what the Madhyamaka says. How is that possible? It looks like we'd have to go back into Chittamatra fields, just like Vajira. Outside stuff, conventional, but this, hey, come on. This is so up close and real. So that's where we're going right now. Two things in these next sequence of meditations. One is just get really familiar with, get a very clear 20/20 vision of just consciousness, the flow, the event, the current that you can just float in, being aware, being aware, being aware, being aware. So you really get a clear bead, a gotcha. Once you've got gotcha, as Penshen Rinpoche says in his passage there, once you've realized that, then you know the conventional nature of the mind, that is consciousness. You know. And then you're poised, ready to do the deep work of examining whether this stream of consciousness actually does exist by its own inherent nature or not. So that's one agenda. And the other one is the mind. Now we're dealing with a noun, right? The subject, the agent, the perceiver, the observer. These are all nouns that have the attribute of knowing. This mind knows, this mind perceives. Moreover, this mind does things. It meditates, it gets angry, it comes up with business plans, and so forth. It does all kinds of stuff. But what is that mind? It's the agent, it's over here. You're over there, object's over here, the mind in here. The subjective mind that perceives, that knows, that remembers, gets angry, gets peaceful, becomes compassionate, creates. It's a noun. The word is a noun. It's a subject, and it really seems to be in here and not over there. What is it? What is that subjective mind that knows and does? And if you don't know the referent, you kind of say, I don't know. Then you can't check out how it exists. If you don't even know what you're looking at, what you're talking about. So this is heavy living, isn't it? This could be a bit of work. And that's exactly where Padmasambhava is taking us right now. Okay? Deep work. So let's go. Settle body, speech, and mind in the natural state. And once again, integral to the practice is the point of letting your eyes be open, at least somewhat. Eyes soft and relaxed, never strained. All the muscles around the eyes soft and relaxed. Blink whenever you feel like it. So utterly natural. Nothing forced. And evenly rest your awareness in the space in front of you. Evenly means not looking here or there. Just letting the light out. And resting in space. Without focusing on anything. Without meditating on anything. Simply rest your awareness for a little while without desiring anything. Without striving, without exerting any effort at all. Without modifying anything that comes up, letting it be. And without doing anything at all. Just being aware, which is effortless. And sustaining this flow of being aware, sustaining this flow of mindful presence, without distraction and without grasping. Without distraction means without being carried away by any appearances. Without grasping means without identifying with any of the activities of the mind. And when you're resting in such simplicity, maintaining the flow of clear cognizance, but without taking any interest in any appearances to awareness, any objects of the mind. Then you're bound to become more and more explicitly aware of being aware. Your experience of being conscious will become clearer and clearer. Naked, raw, unadorned, unelaborated. Your closest approximation right now to resting in the substrate consciousness. and occasionally ask, what is this consciousness that is still? Look for the referent of the word. The consciousness, the experience of being conscious, simple, not hidden. And it's at this point that Padmasambhava first introduces the oscillation. The oscillation of arousing, focusing, accentuating, concentrating on the awareness of awareness. Withdrawing from all appearances and focusing single-pointedly on the awareness itself. It's sheer cognizance, it's sheer luminosity. And then releasing your awareness into the objectless, open expanse of space, devoid of appearances, devoid of thoughts, releasing your awareness into space. But as you do so, sustaining gently the flow of awareness, not actually spacing out or losing the flow of cognizance. And when you've become deeply rested and refreshed in that utter relaxation, and you're ready, arouse, accentuate, concentrate, focus your awareness right in upon itself again. Withdrawing from all appearances, but with no sense of contraction. You're not drawing into a small space inside your head, but just accentuating, intensifying your awareness of awareness. And appearances fade out. And then when it's time, you release again into space with no object. So as for the rhythm of this oscillation, the arousal and release, you can set it at your own pace, your own frequency. If it helps you in the early phases of this practice, you may conjoin that rhythm with the rhythm of the respiration as you breathe in, arouse, focus. Maintaining just a peripheral awareness of that rhythm. As the breath flows out, then release your awareness into space. All the while, non-conceptually, and as continuously as possible, sustain the clear and cognizant flow of awareness. And let's continue practicing now in silence. So that was a complete explanation of that method. I don't think there's anything more that needs to be added. So you can see it's quite simple, but in its simplicity, while you're doing it, it's very easy for this afflictive uncertainty to arise. You're doing it, and then the thought comes, I'm probably not doing it correctly. I'm not sure I got it. Maybe not. And that's the internal mara of afflictive uncertainty. It's not some ghost assaulting you. It's one of the 5 obscurations. It's the 5th one, afflictive uncertainty. And the antidote for that, among the 5 jhana factors, I won't go into that whole detail right now, but there are 5 jhana factors that emerge and ripen as you develop shamatha, and there are 5 obscurations that go dormant. And the 5th obscuration is afflictive uncertainty, and among the 5 jhana factors, the one that is the direct antidote for afflictive uncertainty is precise investigation. And that is, you just bring in your intelligence and you really check it out carefully, and then you dispel the uncertainty. So I can tell you how to do that, because our time is running short, and maybe that afflictive uncertainty will come a week from now, and I'll be in Spain leading another retreat. And so here's how you do it. You really can know how to dispel your own afflictive uncertainty in this method. And that is, as you're resting in the practice, and then you're just kind of checking in, am I doing it correctly or not? I'll put it this way. I know it is tautological, but if you're not doing it incorrectly, you're doing it correctly. And then you say, how do you do it incorrectly? Here are 3 ways. You know what to do, simply rest in awareness, being aware of awareness. But if at any time you become distracted, going elsewhere, you're not doing the practice. You're being distracted. That's not a practice. That's just being distracted. That's a possibility. If you're doing that, you're not doing it correctly. Another possibility is grasping arises, a thought, a desire, an emotion, something comes up within the mind, and you hitch a ride, and you're thinking it, you're feeling it, and so forth. Your awareness has fused with this activity of the mind. Your attention has gone to the referent of the thought, the desire, the emotion. You're not doing this practice anymore. You're just feeling or thinking or remembering. That's not a practice. So you're not doing the practice. And so that's the second way of not doing the practice. And then a third one that comes to mind, and I think I'm finished with the third, and that is if you're resting in that flow of cognizance, aware of aware of aware, and then the clarity of the cognizance, the knowing quality, fades, a bit dull, spacey. You're not doing the practice. That's a flaw. So 3. You're distracted, you're identifying with or grasping to some mental event, or you're losing clarity. You're losing clarity. If any of those 3 are occurring, you're either not doing the practice at all or you're doing it poorly. If you're distracted, you're just not resting in awareness at all. So that's not doing the practice incorrectly. You may as well be playing golf. It's just something entirely different. And likewise, if you're grasping to identifying with mental events, that's not doing the practice at all. You may as well be boating. It's totally different. It's not a practice at all. You're just sitting there thinking. That's not a practice. You don't need to learn that from me. That gradient of losing the sharpness a little bit, losing it more, some laxity, some dullness, heavy dullness, spacing out. Okay, I guess you can say you're doing the practice, but poorly. And if you made that a habit, then you'll be cultivating stupor. Literally, you'll be cultivating stupor. If you slip into a dull state of mind, the cognizance is not clear, and it's getting duller and duller, that's a state of stupor. And if you cultivate it, like cultivating compassion or loving kindness or samadhi, if you cultivate stupor and you really get good at it, you master it, then you will turn that noun into an adjective. You become stupid. Through hours and hours of training, you can start out smart and wind up being stupid. So don't do that. So that's it. When you want to check up once in a while, just to see, am I doing the practice? Yes or no, or am I doing it correctly? Those are 2 different questions. Then just check out those 3 things. That's not that difficult. And when you check in, if you see, retrospectively, you're making a little break there. Was I distracted? Was I grasping? Was I losing clarity? Little checks. And you say, no, no, no. Then good, be quiet. Go right back in. Because that's it. If you're not doing it incorrectly, you're doing it correctly. That's simple. And then you can stop asking the question. I mean, later on you might not be doing it because of distraction or grasping. Not doing it well because you're losing clarity. But that's how you check. It's cut and dried. Those three qualities, if they're present, you're either not doing it at all or doing it poorly. If those three are not there, then because you're not doing it incorrectly, you're doing it correctly. And it is really simple. And that's the part that when we're doing something, you're weaving a basket, you're polishing your backhand in tennis, you're learning something, you can always do it better, right? You can hit the backhand with more topspin. You can weave the basket faster. You can do it better, right? Probably you can do it better. And maybe you want to do it better. You don't want an A minus, you want an A, you want an A plus. But in this practice, you're not doing anything. So you can't not do anything better. Because you're really actually not doing anything. That oscillation, okay, that's a little bit of doing, but that's temporary. But when you're in that initial phase, you're just resting in awareness of awareness, just being aware, that's actually not doing anything at all. Because as I mentioned before, you're already aware of being aware, right now. You're already aware of being aware. So it's not doing something more, it's just a whole bunch of doing less. Because right now we're already aware of being aware. So, that's the first out of 4 phases. And so if we're looking at the notes, where I am, because we just skipped that whole section of a whole bunch of juicy scientific quotes, which I'm happy to skip, because you can read them, they're perfectly clear. Then we go on to Shamatha and Vipassana on the nature of the mind, a long quote from Penshin Losang Chukyi Gyaltsen text on Mahamudra. You're familiar with all of this, so I think no further comment is needed. It's quite clear, read through it. If you're Gelugpa, then this will be right in your own tradition, and it'll take you all the way to Shamatha. And then, if you'd like to see what was I interpreting as I gave the guided meditation in the session we just finished, what was my base? I didn't make that up. I said it's from Padmasambhava. So now let's just read exactly what he said, and then you can see how my interpretation, how close that is to what he actually said in English translation. And so Padmasambhava, in this text, states, while steadily gazing into the space in front of you, without meditating on anything, steadily concentrate your consciousness, without wavering, in the space in front of you. Increase the stability and then relax again. That's what he said. There's the oscillation. Occasionally seek out what is that consciousness that is concentrating. Steadily concentrate again and then check it out again. Do that in an alternating fashion. It's a little bit like what's that kind of exercise called? Where you just, a special one, but it would just like working out in a gym. You flex and then you relax. You flex and you relax, just like that. There's another word for it, but it doesn't matter. It's just where you're flexing and relaxing. It happens all over the place, pumping iron and so forth. Flexing and relaxing. It's exactly what you're doing here. You're flexing when you intensify, you sharpen, you really give some effort, just enough to be really clear, and then whoo. But again, not whoo and spacing out, just relaxing. So he explains that. He says, do that in an alternating fashion. There's the oscillation. And then very interestingly, because you'll see in this whole presentation, all the way down to the end, where he says, up to this point, the instructions have concerned the practice of shamatha with and without signs. That's the end of it. And then the very next passage goes into Vipassana. In that long section, it's more than a page. You note that in that whole presentation, which is complete, he never even refers to introspection, which is extremely unusual in meditation manuals or pith instructions on shamatha. They almost always talk about mindfulness and introspection. Mindfulness on your object, introspection, monitoring the flow of mindfulness. Almost always. It's just bread and butter of it. Here he never mentions it. And he's taking care of that by way of this technique that he introduced of oscillation. No reference to introspection, but he does refer to oscillation. He'll do so repeatedly. And so he says, do that in an alternating fashion, even if there are problems of laxity and lethargy, that will dispel them. So laxity is one of the two extremes, excitation and laxity. Laxity, loss of clarity. Lethargy, deep loss of clarity. Normally, in other practices, where there's a vector, you're shamatha with a sign, you're attending to something, so there you're looking at it, introspection comes in here to see whether laxity or excitation have set in. But here there's no it, there's no vector. It's awareness being aware of awareness. And so simply by this arousal and release, the arousal in particular, if you're kind of starting to slip into laxity, a bit of loss of clarity, that arousal will banish it. And then you relax. He says that will dispel them. So the work that would be the work of introspection is being done by the rhythm of the oscillation. And then he says, in all your activities, rely upon unwavering mindfulness. So there's this one sentence on what to do between sessions. And then you may note with quite a lot of interest, do that for one day. That for one day. There are a lot of preceding methods, starting with a stick, stone, or a flower. I think he says do that for one day. Then he goes to something subtler, and do it for a day, and so he goes right on through. He's marching right through, like a soldier going through different kind of exercises. And often it's just for one day. And that's what he says here. There are going to be 4 phases, and he says do that for one day. So this is for professionals. When he says for one day, he means all day. You're not doing anything else. But you're not sitting in one session of meditation for all day. So you'll take probably 4 sessions, would be classic in the Tibetan tradition. But then in all your activities, rely upon unwavering mindfulness. I think right now might be a very good time to unpack that a bit. And where I'll be drawing from is a much more recent Dzogchen master, Yangtana Rinpoche, in his same text. I'll probably add this to the notes just so you can see exactly what he said. It's very simple and very powerful. I'll just give the gist of it right now. Yangtana Rinpoche, in this short text, he gives the view, Dzogchen view, the meditation, and then conduct or way of life. And when it comes to way of life, where you've already accessed the view and you're sustaining, that is, you've accessed Rigpa, that's the view, that is viewing reality from the perspective of Rigpa, is the Dzogchen view. And once you've been able to access that, come to rest in Rigpa, meditation is simply sustaining the view. It's nothing more than that. So it's actually not doing anything at all. Here in this practice, we're just resting in awareness and just not doing anything at all. But that's the awareness of a human mind. Awareness of a human mind. That's not Rigpa, it's not substrate consciousness, it's just your coarse continuum of mental consciousness that we have right now. That's what you're resting in. So one should never mistake what we just did for resting in Rigpa. It's resting in the coarse flow of mental consciousness of a human mind. But then once you've identified Rigpa, and you've been able to rest at least briefly in Rigpa, pristine awareness, way beyond substrate consciousness, and then you're able to sustain that ongoing way of viewing reality from the perspective of Rigpa, resting, and that's the meditation, and you're not doing anything. Previously, you were not doing anything while resting in the continuum of consciousness, mental consciousness of a human being, and that's conditioned, and it's samsaric, and so forth. You could be resting in substrate consciousness, which is also samsaric and conditioned, but not human. You cut through that, and you rest in Rigpa, which is not human and not sentient being and not conditioned. It's transcendent. That's meditation, is resting in that, and again you're not doing anything. But now you're not doing anything in a much deeper way. Because you're resting in Rigpa rather than just the substrate consciousness, let alone just human consciousness. So you're resting there. But even there, and he's speaking as a man who, when he told us the daily schedule of 16 hours a day meditation in four sessions, to my mind it was perfectly obvious he was speaking about his own experience. He was a professional yogi, that's all he did. So speaking from his own experience then, even if you're meditating 16 hours a day, he was suggesting that you sleep 4 hours a day. The professional? So like you have special forces, you must have special forces in the UK, yeah? What is their training like? I imagine pretty intensive. And you don't do anything else. I mean, when you're in training to become special forces, then that's just basically, that's all you do. And so likewise, if you're in special forces, a Dzogchen practitioner, then you just don't do anything else. I mean, this is just all you do all day. So it's 16 hours of formal training, and then your sleep is from 10 to 2 in the morning. So now we take 16 plus 4 is 20. You have 4 hours. 4 hours for what you can do in between sessions. 4 hours. But you're not sleeping and you're not formally in meditation. So that's where conduct comes in, 4 hours a day. That's where conduct, way of life comes in. But what are you going to do during the 4 hours when you're not sleeping and you're not formally in meditation? That's when the contemplative, a monk, nun, a layperson, will be washing one's clothes, cooking, cleaning one's cabin, going for a walk. Pretty simple lifestyle. But then during those 4 hours, or maybe your in-between session is longer than that, what do you do during the 4 hours when you're kind of off duty, actually? You're not in formal practice. And his pith instructions are very simple, and this is my commentary on, in all your activities, rely upon unwavering mindfulness. And that is his advice here, which I found very, very profound, is that as you're doing whatever you need to do, washing your clothes, etc., ordinary stuff, maintain that ongoing flow of awareness, and ongoing flow of awareness of the mind. And whenever a thought, not whenever, but when thoughts arise, memories, fantasies, just thoughts come up. They will continue to come up. In between session, they're going to come up. That's what the mind does. It spews out thoughts, memories, emotions, and so forth. When the thought comes up, just let it come up. Of course, don't identify with it, but just let it come up and play itself out. Be fully aware of it as it comes up, comes into flower, blossoms, and then just releases itself. But every thought that comes up, be aware of it. Don't let one pass by unnoticed. So you can do that while you're brushing your teeth, going for a walk. You have enough consciousness left over to be ongoingly aware of whatever comes up in the mind. Whatever comes up, just let it unimpededly flow, whatever it may be. Literally, with no censorship. We've done that before. But now, in between sessions, let it come up. And just let it then release itself. It comes up spontaneously, uninvited, plays itself out, releases itself without any effort. And during the interval, from the moment that it arises until the moment it's just gone, don't modify it, don't improve it, don't fix it, don't do anything to it at all. And that's the advice. And do that all the time. Except somebody just asked me this question in Russia. What if you need to write a grocery list? Because if you're in a retreat, probably somebody will buy your food for you. Can you write a grocery list without thinking about it? And my answer here, because I've spent years in retreat, in solitary retreat, not at that level, but as well as I could. You pick, that is, you're resting, your ground state, just kind of that ground state in between sessions, just resting in this utterly fresh, non-conceptual, attentive, discerning awareness. Not caught up in thoughts, memories, and so forth. That's your ground state. Whatever thoughts come up, you simply notice them, and then they're gone. That's your ground state. But on occasion, you may need to think about something. Like somebody says, "Hey, Carol." You say, "Yes?" You don't go. And so when it's time to think, like, "Yes, what can I do for you, Fred?" You have to think that. When it comes time to think, or writing out a grocery list, or whatever it may be, when it's time to think, then you engage in thought like picking up a knife and fork. And then you think, and as soon as you finish thinking, you know that you don't need to think anymore, and you put down the knife and fork until you need to pick them up again. But frankly, you might be amazed, especially when you're in retreat, you might be amazed how little you need to think. And in between thinking, again, this is enormously important, you're not spacing out. It's just that you've slipped into a subtler way of knowing that doesn't need the baggage of thought. It's discerning, it's clear, it's non-conceptual, but it's absolutely sharp and clear and not zoned out or the fool on the hill and all that jazz. And then as soon as, again, you need to think, you pick it up, you think, you put it down. So you're quite parsimonious with thinking. And when we hear of individuals like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Gyaltsen Rinpoche, for that matter, Yangdren Rinpoche, who need almost no sleep or no sleep at all, I think you can imagine, if that's how often you thought, you just pick it up and then put it down. And then right after that, it's just silence, clear, crystal, discerning, but no chit-chat, no leakage of just thoughts dribbling on. Then you can imagine that would be very little wear and tear. Very, very little. You just pick it up and put it down. And then in between, quiet, clear, calm. I think you can imagine you might not need any sleep at all. In contrast to imagine, maybe you don't have to imagine too hard, maybe you can simply remember times when the mind is so congested. It's like all the thoughts are trying to pump in and then pushing each other aside. Let me in, no, me, blah, 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 blah. Like downtown Waterloo Station. Like just so much noise, so much congestion. And even half an hour of that can be exhausting. I think I need to take a nap. And so if we can learn how to think, where we just think when we need to and put it down. And I like this image, rather than a person who has breakfast with a knife and fork, have your eggs and toast, and then you get up from the breakfast table, kiss your spouse goodbye, bye-bye, sweetie, see you later, oh. And you bring the knife and fork with you. Wherever you go, knife and fork. If you walked into a bank, I thought about this. The guard might throw you to the ground. Knife, weapon. Two of them actually, a fork and a knife. So you can see it's really silly. That would be really silly to walk around just brandishing a fork and a knife throughout the course of the day. Really silly. I mean, then you can't use your hands for anything else. And it's really silly to just go blah, 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 blah all the way all through the day. It's really silly. Just so much wasted energy for almost no productivity at all. The rambling, ruminating mind, mostly totally unproductive and really exhausting. So you might try that. We'll continue having our breaks for these last 2 or 3 days. And try that. Try that. Just being very present and then think whenever you feel like it. There's no restriction on thinking, but just don't have, the ongoing diarrhea of the mind. It's a nice image. So that's for one day. That's what he said. That's what he said. We'll look at the rest of it later on. We have a wonderful presentation of Kachut Wombo, one of the greats, Vipassana on the mind. We'll get to that. And now, it's 4 o'clock. So I think where I'd like to go after the break is then, I said we'd venture into Madhyamaka today. We're not going to finish it, but into the perfection of wisdom, the second turning wheel of Dharma. Chittamatra, mind only, is associated with the third turning wheel of Dharma. Madhyamaka, Nagarjuna, is associated with the second turning wheel of Dharma, perfection of wisdom, such as the Heart Sutra. So let's take a break now. It's 4 o'clock, and then we'll come back and meditate again. We'll go to phase 2 of this fifth instruction by Padmasambhava, and then we'll break the ice and look into the perfection of wisdom. And then perfection of wisdom are the teachings attributed to the Buddha in these Mahayana sutras. And then Madhyamaka is the systematization of this perfection of wisdom in the middle way view, which is formulated first of all by the great Nagarjuna. So we'll look into that a bit this afternoon, and I think tomorrow morning we'll move on. But right now, let's take a break and come back at 4:30.